Hi, Trevor here, reflecting on life through music. Thank you for stopping by. Well, coming again today, you're very welcome. How good to see everybody back. I trust you enjoyed my last video on Australia's singer-songwriter Goyte, and through his song, Someone I Used to Know, we looked at being known and how that tends to carry on a little bit. So I trust you found that one encouraging. Well, we're going on to a band that started out as the Warlocks, Palo Alto, California. Jerry Garcia, lead guitar and vocals, Bob Weir, rhythm guitar vocals, Rob McKernan, keyboards, Phil Lush, bass, Bill Crossman, drums. That was the starting lineup anyway. These guys are an American institution. Eclectic, blues, jazz, country, bluegrass, rock and roll, reggae, and world music. In fact, these guys were regarded as the pioneers of jam band, basically just getting up and doing whatever. And this is what made these guys so compelling and such a force of nature. The guys we're talking about are the Grateful Dead. Now, I knew nothing about these guys, and when I went on to my normal place I go to look, I thought, well, there's just a lot of stuff there. Had to go to a video to get a bit of a documentary summary of these guys, because these guys are absolutely massive. With their league of fans known as the Deadheads, who just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as these guys got on. They had a very uncomfortable relationship with the record industry, but it didn't matter. Wherever they went, the fans just followed, and they followed in absolute droves. So 1960s, what was happening? Well, we had in the UK, we had the Beatles doing what they were doing. In the United States, we had bands like the Beach Boys doing stuff what they were doing. Bob Dylan, who very famously put down the acoustic guitar and picked up an electric at the Newport Folk Festival around 1965-66 and ushered in this thing of rock and roll in folk. This is the culture. Of course, the late 1960s also had the hippie culture, free love. Drugs were really truly part of the thing back there. And so these guys were known as the Flower Power Band in lots of ways, because they just captured with their lyrics the very essence of what it meant to be a hippie in that late 1960s period. So they were really truly part of this counterculture. The Grateful Dead were renowned for making things up as they went along. You never really knew what was going to happen when you went to a Grateful Dead for concert. You just knew it was going to be something pretty cool. And so they made things up as they went along, and they had wide open possibilities. But they also kept themselves for the music. They had a very, I suppose, tenuous relationship with fame and popularity, even though these guys got very popular through their career. It was all about the music with these guys and living for the moment. Now, the Grateful Dead's an interesting name. Apparently it was just found in the dictionary, and the meaning kind of just meant something to them, so they adopted the name the Grateful Dead. They've also been known as just the Dead, and their fans known as Deadheads. So there we go. If you have a name for your fans, you've made it. And the Deadheads became renowned for just flocking to see these guys whenever they played. They were signed to Warner Brothers, and their first album came out in 1967. This then led on to extensive touring. Now, the thing about the Grateful Dead, they're a live act, absolute live act. And they would perform stacks and stacks of times during their career. So they extensively toured. Success was a little bit elusive though, but they did get to play in the iconic Woodstock concert. But near the end of this point, the stage was starting to wear out. The sound system was starting to not go good. And it wasn't the best of performances for the Grateful Dead, which would have been built up as something pretty amazing. But out in 1970 came the album American Beauty. Now, Rolling Stone in their 3 times, 258 of the top 500 albums of all time, then 261, then 215. So this album's very significant indeed. And we've got off that album, Sugar Magnolia, live version of that one. You just see there's just something ethereal, almost ethereal about these guys. They just waffle and they do what they do. The harmonies are pretty good. Jerry's such a compelling guy up front, and we'll get a little bit more into his story in a minute. But there's just something about these guys that, you know, they wouldn't leave you alone. The tunes would get in your head. The way they would get into your head, because it was all about the audience and the crowd and just giving them the best possible time. It was in 1973 that Rob Pigpen McKernan died, the drummer. Of course, at that point, the Grateful Dead said, well, oh God, what are we going to do now? Actually, keyboard player, I should say, not drummer. He's such a significant sound, really. What are we going to do? And so they did eventually rally, and they kept going, and they kept on moving on, getting other keyboard player to replace him. And he was a bit of a legend, this guy. He had a lot more keyboards, and he was a bit of a, really got the sound a little bit better, I'm thinking. But they were still not, it wasn't really happening for these guys, but they were touring a stack, performing in excess of 100 shows a year, which is pretty amazing. I thought, what can do? So what they thought, they said, hey, let's build our fan base, and they got people to sign up for a newsletter. And that made all the difference, because every time they put a newsletter up, fans were waiting for them to perform. In fact, the mailing list got to 100,000 people. So the Deadheads well and truly were forming at this point. They then started to tour in stadiums. The small shows were gone and the stadiums started to take over, and they created the wall of sound. Some 641 speakers were part of their rig. Stacks of semi-trailers needed to get the stuff around. And so they were starting to hit their stride, what it meant to be a live act in big arenas. It was around that time they were getting a bit fed up with the record industry, so they formed their own label. That just added a whole heap of extra pressure that the guys didn't need. And even though they had a couple of albums under their own label, they decided, it's not really going to work. We're musicians, not businessmen. So then Arista Records came into the picture, and they had the first producer produce their albums from the outside for a while. And at that point on, they got quite successful. And they were performing around 70 shows a year. And so these guys were still cranking out big time. In fact, there was one concert that went for 3 to 4 hours. In fact, in 1978, these guys played in Egypt in front of the pyramids. They had 25 tons of equipment that day, and they played for 3 solid nights. But of course, what was also happening in the late 1970s, Saturday Night Fever happened, and that issued in pop, disco, and all the rest of it. Of course, the Grateful Dead were not a pop disco act. They were very much rock, but they did dabble in that a little bit. But the Grateful Dead could be relied upon to be that stable rock act. If you wanted to rock your socks off, you went to see these guys. In 1980, out came the album Go to Heaven, and we've got a live version of Alabama Getaway from that one. Again, you'll get to see these guys in action. So it's around this time that we get to the 1980s that the hippies of the 1960s are now starting to have kids. And the Grateful Dead, and because these guys were so iconic, the hippie culture was bringing their children to see the Grateful Dead concert. And because of that, the Grateful Dead found a resonance with a new audience. It's pretty cool. In fact, around that time, they're one of the highest grossing live acts in the United States. So pretty big indeed. It was also around that time, because obviously the drug culture never left this band really. If you were around the drug culture of the 1960s, LSD and all that sort of stuff, it was very hard to let it go. Jerry Garcia had a very unfortunate relationship with drugs for most of his life. It was around that time he started to get off. Really, things weren't going good for him. But all credit to him, he did actually kick the habit for a while, came back for drugs, got his guitar and his swagger back, and he was welcomed back into the Grateful Dead. It's around 1987, they had their first top 10 hit in the Dark. Actually, the album was In the Dark, and the song Touch of Grey was a massive song for these guys. We've got the official clip on this one below. Now, if you think about Grateful Dead, you're going to have skeletons on stage playing guitars, aren't you? And so this is a pretty clever clip, this one. It really captures the concept of coming back from the brink. And there's something I want to talk to you a little bit more about here today, and that is that Jerry Garcia, who is an American institution, his story, again, touched by drugs. And when you are in the dark, which Jerry absolutely was, you need a touch of something to get you out of that. You need something that's getting to get you back from the brink. In fact, one of the lines in the song is, "I will survive." Reminds me of Gloria Gaynor. I did about 2 or 3 videos again now about I will survive. There was enough in Jerry to enable him to pick up his socks, pick up where he left off, write a song about it, which actually got in the top. It was a top 10 hit for these guys. And just continue the Grateful Dead's incredible journey. And so, if you are on the brink or coming back from stuff at the moment, touch of grey. We may not need light straight away, but no, grey is a step up from dark, isn't it? And so we want to be able to capitalize on these feelings when they come, capture them, act on them, because we think we don't really want to do anything at all, but we need moments to actually inspire us to get back from where we are. And so if you're going through stuff right now, perhaps you need, and you're in the dark, to look for those touches of grey. All you need to do is look outside at the sky and the clouds, and you can see that life will continue. It will continue while you learn to live with the stuff that you live with at the same time. This is the dual process approach of grief, and that is, we're dealing with stuff, but we're walking forward. So trust that will be encouraging for you today. The Grateful Dead were triumphant on their own terms. In fact, in 1991, they, again, a highest earner, they actually earned around $20 million on the road with very, very full stadiums. Until 1994, they grossed $50 million as a live act. It's one of the highest in the United States, given these guys have been around since 1965, some 30 years earlier. Pretty amazing that the Deadhead crowd that were following them around were still following them around after all this time. Live concerts were their thing, absolutely. But unfortunately for Jerry, he didn't quite make it. He went back into relapses in 1995, and he did leave us in that year. There was an outpouring of grief at that point. First of all, from the Deadheads themselves. Bill Clinton paid tribute to him publicly. There are many other people in America that paid tribute to Jerry Garcia and his incredible legacy that he had left the world. It was a much-loved character, and much-loved characters who didn't really... we weren't talking superstar. He just had this way about him. In fact, 25,000 people attended his memorial service. And the Grateful Dead said, well, actually, there's not going to be any Grateful Dead without Jerry. And so 30 years after they started, they ended their career. Just as a bit of a poignant clip too, we've got a clip of the Grateful Dead and Jerry Garcia, 1995. Now, this is very, very close to his death. And so we've got a live version of him there. Just try to get into what is the mythology of Jerry Garcia. Is get into who he was and what he meant to this world and what he meant to America and the legion of fans that he had. 1994, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Bruce Horsnby, one of the many that played with the Grateful Dead, inducted them, which is pretty cool. We've got a live clip of him inducting them. Grateful Dead played more than 2,300 shows during their career, so that's a lot of shows right there. Rolling Stone put them number 57 of the top 100 artists of all time, and they've won a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Between 1967 and 1990, 13 studio albums, so not a lot of recording there. 10 live albums, lots of live, 10 compilation albums, 10 video albums, 27 singles, estimated to have sold around 35 million albums, which is pretty successful in the scheme of things. So For a band I knew nothing about, I realised what I'd been missing out on as a music fan, to not realise these guys really existed until I looked them up this week. They really cemented themselves into the American psyche big time. They were American music for many, many years. And because of that, they deserve the accolade of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as well. And rest in peace, Jerry Garcia. Thank you for what, as the principal songwriter for the Grateful Dead, thank you for what you brought to the world. So the links to those 5 clips are in the description below, and I've also included my last video from Goyte, just for someone completely different if you want to recap on him. Well, I trust you've enjoyed this this bit of a history into this iconic band today. If you've come back for another one, or this is your first time to Life Reflections Through Music, thank you to everyone for being here, or coming for the first time. That's it for today. Next time we're going to get on to Green Day. So until then, I'll catch you around. Bye for now.